This is Crisis Point. This year, an autonomous quality assurance organization known as ValueAssure reported that there may be concerningly high levels of the human carcinogen benzene within acne treatment products using benzoyl peroxide. ValueAssure's report this year represents a potentially significant event in the field of dermatology, given the ubiquity of benzoyl peroxide. We spoke with ValueAssure president and co-founder David Light, along with two dermatologists, Drs. Christopher Bunick and Neal Bhatia, about their take on ValueAssure's findings.
We've found this in a variety of consumer products over the last few years. We first filed a report and a petition in 2021 on benzene and hand sanitizers. There's recalls that followed. We found it in sunscreens, body sprays, dry shampoos, a variety of consumer products where it was contaminant. So in hand sanitizers, a contaminant of the gelling agents, the carbamers. In sunscreens and other spray products, it was often a contaminant of the propellant. So ingredients that were not intended to be in these products, and only a subset of the products that we looked at, sometimes 10, 20, 30% or so of the various product categories were contaminated at various levels with benzene. And what we're finding with benzoyl peroxide acne products is that there is this contamination as well, some dozens of parts per million sometimes, which is well above even the conditional kind of emergency limit of 2 parts per million of benzene set by the FDA. But what particularly concerns us about benzoyl peroxide drug products is it's not just that there's also this contamination of benzene sitting on the shelf, but that BPO products can form benzene over time.
I give everyone credit who did their homework on looking into this issue, because obviously, patient safety is going to be the primary endpoint for any kind of report that shows kind of toxicities that benzene could potentially cause.
The key finding ultimately in both of these studies is that benzoyl peroxide itself can be unstable and break down into benzene, which is a well-known carcinogen. And what we're hearing in dermatology is a lot of concern, a lot of question. What does this mean in terms of the safety for the patients, and in terms of what should we do as providers? Do we recommend benzoyl peroxide containing products? And then what happens going forward, both from an FDA regulatory standpoint, and which products may have the least amount of benzene? How do we know? What's the research show?
This seems to be a situation where you're not only seeing the carcinogen benzene as a contaminant, but also actually being able to be formed by BPO acne treatment products, and is a process that's specific to the BPO molecule, not acne treatment as a whole. We looked at salicylic acid, we looked at retinoids, adapalene, and others that are available over the counter and prescription, and did not find this benzene issue in any other acne treatment products that do not contain benzoyl peroxide. So it is benzoyl peroxide specific, and again, both contamination, and even if it was an entirely cleanly made material, or clean even when we first analyze it, relatively speaking, it can form dangerous levels of benzene, and depending on the conditions, either dozens or even over 1,000 parts per million of benzene in accelerated conditions.
The studies are incredibly impactful because they raise questions to the potential safety of benzoyl peroxide containing products and whether they should be continued to be included in the acne and rosacea treatment paradigm.
ValueAssure's findings led to their 8th U.S. Food and Drug Administration citizen petition. Despite the significance of these findings, the question remains how healthcare providers should respond to the news.
So after identifying about a third of these over-the-counter products already at the beginning had elevated benzene beyond this conditional limit set by the FDA of 2 parts per million, the point is, well, how do we immediately protect patients? And an additional study in that publication looked at taking a product for rosacea, the Epsilay product for rosacea, and looking at it not just at room temperature or elevated temperature, but also looking at it at cold temperature, refrigeration temperature, showing that the rate of breakdown of benzoyl peroxide into benzene was actually slowed down tremendously by refrigeration. So this has really practical implications for everyday use of benzoyl peroxide products. What it tells us is that while scientists, researchers, government officials are all trying to figure out what to do, how to improve, stabilize benzoyl peroxide, in the short term, a short-term potential remedy or fix is to store these products in refrigeration temperatures.
Most of the detectable levels of benzene were based on storage at high temperatures. I think some of the report was about 50 degrees centigrade or more. Again, most of us in the real world are not living at those temperatures. I think if I lived in the Middle East or some other high desert area, I'd be a little concerned. But the vast majority of us are not storing medications at that temperature. The other thing too is we've heard a lot about the brand drug Captrio from Ortho and how it's passed through cold chain supply. So therefore, the benzoyl peroxide should not be at that degradative temperature until it reaches room temperature, which is still not close to 50 degrees centigrade. I think most of us don't keep our room temperature above maybe 70 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe a little bit less than that or more than that, depending on the winter season. That being said, too, I mean, the cautions of storage of drugs at home, I don't think there'd be anything wrong if someone kept their benzoyl peroxide in the refrigerator. It might be inconvenient if they use it in the shower. But for the most part, a wash or a combination product that has benzoyl peroxide would be stable enough in their vehicle that I think, unless really exposed to high temperatures at consistent time, the risk of benzene degradation should be pretty minimal, if not close to zero.
And it really changes a lot depending on the various products. Certain formulations seem to be more unstable than others. In general, though, the benzoyl peroxide molecule is unstable. And you're right, we were finding some products that had high levels of benzene even sitting on the shelf. And all products seem to be able to generate it over time. And we did also look even in the recent study published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology, where if you store it at cold temperature, you don't see this formation over time in a same product where we stored it in accelerated, higher temperatures, like 50 degrees Celsius. You see a lot of formation of benzene, but if it's refrigerated, just makes sense that you would keep it more stable. We know that there's been associations and doctors that have come out and recommended the storage of benzoyl peroxide products in refrigerators, or certainly making sure that if it's expired to throw it out, or ideally even using it relatively quickly and not storing long-term benzoyl peroxide products. And all these recommendations are certainly aligned with what the chemistry that we're seeing.
It also speaks to the shipping practices that should occur across the country. The benzoyl peroxide containing products should be shipped, from manufacturing, shipping, in the pharmacy, and to the patient, all kept what's called cold chain under cold refrigeration. And when the patients get it at the pharmacy, they should be able to take their benzoyl peroxide containing product, keep it in the refrigerator at home. And what this is going to do is help protect that benzoyl peroxide, extend its lifespan so it's not degraded into benzene at a fast enough rate. And then if you couple that practice with changing out your benzoyl peroxide product roughly every 10 to 12 weeks, that's going to minimize as best as possible exposures to unwanted levels of benzene.
Ideally, either the instability will be fixed so it doesn't form over time. If you do forget it in a hot car, or even if it was in a hot transportation vehicle before it came to the retail shelf or to the pharmacy, these things obviously happen, and is part of the reason that these controls are in place. So that would be ideal to have a fix, and certainly in the interim, at least storing in cold conditions or these other recommendations certainly are reasonable.
No one yet knows what will happen now that ValueSure has filed their FDA citizen petition. Looking at the near future, we asked our experts about their views on the matter.
A lot of people will say, well, the benzene levels seem so low. Why am I even worried about this? Well, the problem with benzene is it's a lot like sun exposure, right? Low levels of chronic exposure add up risk over time. Just like you would never tell a patient, that sunburn you got in your teenage years didn't matter. Well, it's going to contribute to potentially skin cancers you get 30, 40 years later. And that cumulative dose of benzene exposure over one's lifetime, it adds that risk up for different malignancies.
There are many chemicals of concern out there now. A lot of people talking about phthalates and parabens and endocrine disruptors they're all areas that are being actively researched and could very well be damaging to health. But it's very much in a maybe space in the scientific world. Something like benzene is in the same category as asbestos, formaldehyde, arsenic, lead. There's no debate that arsenic is a poison that is very bad for you.
That is the concern, is it's about the cumulative risk over decades, not necessarily what happens in a year or 2 years, although certainly those are questions that need to be asked too. So I think that the perspective of kind of thinking about cumulative benzene exposure like we think about cumulative and intense sun exposure is a good way to put it in perspective. And we want to minimize that exposure as best as possible. And I think there are products out there right now that have this cold chain supply. One of those is the triple combination antibiotic that has the adapalene, benzoyl peroxide, and clindamycin. This triple therapy combination actually is cold chain from manufacturing to the pharmacy. And so what I've been doing when I prescribe that for my patients is to actually just say, hey, get it, keep it in the refrigerator at home, and use it that way. And it works just fine. And I know it works just fine because my teenage son is on it too, and it's working great. And he's very happy, and I'm very happy, and we're doing it in a very safe way. And so I feel comfortable using these types of products with these modifications at the current time. But with that said, I do think there continues to be a lot of questions, and I think every provider is going to have a different level of comfort, and every patient will have a different level of comfort. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do think that there's a number of questions about, well, some of these epidemiologic studies that have been published recently don't seem to show an increased risk of cancer. But as I said, we got to think about this in the long term. And a lot of the databases that some of these epidemiological studies are coming from, they're one database. They're not necessarily fully complete. All the data that you may need to understand things such as blood benzene levels, a lot of that data is actually not necessarily complete, accurate, or sufficient to answer some of the scientific questions that we really need to know. And so I do think there needs to be a lot more research into this area, and then there will be over time. So a lot of this science is certainly hypothesis generating as well, and will create new investigations, new research, and hopefully come up with an innovative new way to utilize benzoyl peroxide in dermatology. That's what's going to come out of all of this, is a very exciting new way to utilize it, or something even better that helps patients even more with greater safety.
Any patient who comes to me and asks about it, I remind them, again, don't leave your drugs on an engine block. Don't take them to the sauna, right? Don't eat them. Just again, put them at temperatures that are in your normal bathroom. Someone asked, what about in the shower? And I say again, the hot shower, unless you're directly exposing it to that water temperature, is probably not going to heat the product. The air around the product, if it's a few minutes, is probably not going to significantly elevate the temperature of the drug. But if there is a concern about it, have them keep it in the fridge until they actually put it on, and then they can put it back in the fridge. And I don't think that's a big problem. But I think a lot of it is about, again, just being diligent. And it's a good thing that we learned about these things, but I'm not going to change a lot of other behaviors because of it. I will just make sure that patients know about the safety and what can be done about it.
So absolutely, a patient should talk to their doctors before changing anything that they were prescribed, or if they have concerns, certainly over a prescription or even their treatment in general, definitely talk to a doctor. And what we can say, not being doctors, is that it's definitely an option, right? Looking over the counter, that's a big reason why we look more broadly in the acne treatment space, is that we can be confident that at least this kind of benzene formation and instability issue that we're seeing with benzoyl peroxide products is not occurring with salicylic acid and various other common over-the-counter acne treatment options for consumers that do not contain benzoyl peroxide and do not appear to have this issue.
Salicylic acid has some very good keratolytic properties. It also has some good properties against comedone formation. So it's definitely a mainstay in acne. Benzoyl peroxide, again, is a little bit more compatible perhaps with retinoids, for example, or maybe has the variability of different strengths, different percentages. And it's also a very effective spot treatment. So I have patients who I give both products to, and I have no problem with that. Some may like salicylic acid as a wash and benzoyl peroxide as a spotter. Some others would use sal acid in combinations with things. I think again, there's definitely a role for all those products. I would hate to see benzoyl peroxide be substituted or taken away from the patients because of those concerns. But at the same time, I would probably just be cognitive of what's the patient's concern and make sure those fears are mitigated.
What I can say is this, is I know it is fact that the FDA is investigating this. They are researching, they are understanding the problem, and will at some point, I believe, make some recommendations. I also know that the FDA is in direct communication with ValueSure, and they are working on the problem. Some people think, maybe some people erroneously think that there's this big tension between the FDA and ValueSure. It's actually not true. They're working hand in hand to try to solve this problem and to understand the problem and validate and then offer the right recommendations, both to manufacturers as well as to providers as well as to the public.
We've seen petitions and studies where they still haven't been answered, many years later. We've seen, studies where you had recalls and industry actions within weeks. We've seen studies like Zantac where the entire product was withdrawn entirely from the market, and everything in between. So, we hope that at the end of the day, protecting consumers, protecting patients from dangerous, toxic, carcinogenic chemicals like benzene takes the forefront. There's no reason to have this kind of risk. And I think that's an important point, is that, we can debate the toxicology of how much benzene, which conditions, and so on and so forth, but it's absolutely bad. There's nobody that's going to tell you that it's just fine to have benzene and that's totally safe. A lot of the epidemiology very specifically says that there's no safe level of benzene. It doesn't mean that we should overreact or anything of that sort, but it absolutely means that we need actions on this and that we should not be taking the risk of benzene exposure in products that we know can be made without it. There's plenty of acne treatment products that we've tested that do not have this issue. Just like we said, when especially in the dermatology community with sunscreen coming out as being contaminated with benzene, we've made very clear the point that the majority of the products that we tested, sunscreen products, did not contain benzene. This can be done without benzene, and you absolutely should use sunscreen, and it's an important product to use. It's similar with acne treatment. We're not saying that there's no treatment for acne or that there's a fundamental problem with treating acne in some way. It's just this specific issue that we certainly hope that there'll be industry and regulatory action in the coming year.
This has been HCPLive Crisis Point. Thank you for watching.